The light in the debrief chamber was surgical white, the kind that left no shadows and flattened everything it touched into the same sterile gray. The walls were bare. The table was steel. The chairs were bolted to the deck. It was a room built for the purpose of extracting truth from people who had done things that needed explaining, and it had the atmosphere of a room that had been used for that purpose many times before. Rear Admiral Cassell sat with her hands flat on the steel table, palms down, fingers still. She was 60 years old. Her hair was cut short and had gone entirely gray in the 11 years since her forced retirement. The scars on her knuckles were old, earned in a shipboard fire during her first command posting, 34 years ago, and the light made them look like weld seams on a hull that had been repaired too many times. Across from her, 2 intelligence officers from CENTCOM's Review Division leaned forward with their recorders running, and their faces carrying the careful blankness of men who had already read the after-action report and did not believe a word of it. "Start from the recall order," said the one on the left, Commander Hyun. He had a stylus he kept turning between his fingers. Cassell looked at him the way she might look at a weather report. "The recall came at 3:42 on the 11th. I was 72 hours into a fishing trip in the Barrens. No comms rig. A patrol cutter found me by engine heat and put the signal through the hull speaker while I was still in my rack." "And the signal said?" "3 words," Pyre recalled. Hyun stopped turning the stylus. His partner, Lieutenant Commander Odaro, glanced at the file open on her tablet. "For the record, Admiral Pyre was a Class 7 diplomatic incident 11 years ago. Your previous command, Task Force Ashmark, was stood down in the aftermath. You were retired." "Forcibly," Cassell said. "You were offered." "I was removed, call it what it was." The silence that followed was the kind that fills rooms where everyone knows the classified version of a public story. Cassell let it sit. She had waited 11 years. She could wait 11 more seconds. "Walk us through it," Hyun said. So she did. 11 years before the recall, Cassell had commanded Task Force Ashmark, 14 warships, the oldest continuous human strike group still in commission, built around the dreadnought TFS Iron Meridian. Ashmark's patrol sector was the Outer Ven, a thin corridor of neutral space between the Terran frontier and the nearest Vrannok colonial sphere. The Vrannok communion, a bioorganic collective species, part hive swarm, part cathedral organism, part something that human xenobiologists still argued about at conferences, had held 300 systems in the Outer Ven for 9,000 years. They grew their warships the way coral grows a reef, slow, layered, patient, and in numbers that made fleet projections meaningless, because the Vrannok did not build ships so much as they calved them from living orbital structures that never stopped producing. Cassell had watched the communion for 6 years from the bridge of Iron Meridian. She had cataloged their patrol patterns, their calving rates, their diplomatic feints. She had sent 219 intelligence reports to CENTCOM flagging the rate at which Vrannok biovessels were massing along the Pyre corridor, a narrow hyperspace transit point, the only viable route between the Outer Ven and the inner Terran sphere. She had requested reinforcements 9 times. She had been denied 9 times. The Vrannok communion was classified as a diplomatic partner, not a threat. On the morning of the Pyre incident, a Vrannok swarm fleet of 412 biovessels, each one a living organism the size of a frigate, armored in layered chitin that self-healed under fire, transited the gate in formation and opened fire on the Terran border station Arkan 7. The station held 4,100 civilians. Cassell brought Task Force Ashmark to bear in 11 minutes. She destroyed 83 biovessels in the first exchange, lost 2 escorts, and drove the swarm back through the gate. Then she did something that ended her career. She pursued. "You crossed into Vrannok sovereign space," Hyun said in the debrief chamber, his voice carefully neutral. I crossed into Vrannok sovereign space, Cassell confirmed. Without authorization. CENTCOM's response window was 14 hours. The Vrannok calving rate at Pyre Gate was 6 new biovessels per hour. Every hour I waited, the swarm grew by 6. In 14 hours, that's 84 additional warships. I had 14 ships. You do the math. The math is not the issue, Admiral. The math is the only issue. It was then and it is now. Cassell had taken Task Force Ashmark through the Pyre Gate and struck the Vrannok calving structure on the other side. A moon-sized organism tethered to an asteroid, pulsing with the slow bioluminescence of a species that had been growing warships for longer than humanity had existed. She burned the calving nodes. She killed the structure. It took 4 hours. When she pulled Ashmark back through the gate, the Vrannok swarm was scattered. The calving rate at Pyre Gate was 0, and the diplomatic fallout was already metastasizing. The Vrannok Communion lodged a formal protest with every interstellar body that would listen. They called it an unprovoked attack on sovereign biological infrastructure. They called it genocide of a living organism. They called it the act of a species that did not understand what it had destroyed. CENTCOM called it unauthorized escalation. They recalled Task Force Ashmark. They removed Cassell from command. They put Iron Meridian and her sister ships into deep mothball storage at the Threshold Yards, a graveyard orbit facility where decommissioned warships went to wait for the scrappers. They signed a non-aggression framework with the Vrannok Communion that included a clause preventing any reactivation of Ashmark-class vessels within 200 light-years of the outer Ven. Cassell retired to a cabin on a dead rock in the Barrens and did not speak to CENTCOM for 11 years. She did, however, keep a shortwave receiver tuned to the Vrannok calving frequency band, and every year the frequency got louder. The recall order, Cassell said in the debrief chamber, 3 words, Pyre Gate recalled. I was on the patrol cutter within the hour. By the time I reached Threshold Yards, I already knew what had happened. How? Because the calving frequency had gone silent 6 days earlier. When a Vrannok calving structure goes silent, it means one of 2 things. It's dead or it's finished. I'd killed the Pyre Gate structure 11 years ago. The silence wasn't from Pyre Gate, it was from everywhere else. Odaro's tablet beeped. She silenced it without looking. You're saying you knew the Vrannok had completed a mass calving event before CENTCOM briefed you. I'm saying I'd been listening for 11 years while CENTCOM wasn't. The Vrannok don't build fleets the way we do. They grow them. It takes decades. When I destroyed the Pyre Gate calving structure, I set their production back at that one site. They have 67 calving structures across the Communion. CENTCOM's diplomatic framework didn't monitor the other 66. I did. From your cabin. From my cabin, with a shortwave receiver and a star chart I pinned to the wall. I marked every frequency shift. I logged every calving pulse. I kept a tally of the estimated output on the back of the chart in pencil, and every 6 months I erased the old number and wrote the new one. The number went up every time. Hyun looked at his partner. Odaro was making notes on her tablet without looking up. And what was the final number? 9,000, give or take. The mass calving event produced approximately 9,000 new biovessels across all 67 structures in a coordinated 72-hour window. I estimated the number 4 days before CENTCOM's intelligence division confirmed it. They had a satellite network and a 600-person analysis bureau. I had a shortwave receiver and insomnia. The Threshold Yards were exactly as Cassell remembered them. A ring of dead warships in graveyard orbit around a brown dwarf, their running lights cold, their hulls already dulling with the first film of vacuum corrosion. Iron Meridian sat at the center of the ring, 1,340 meters of matte black Terran dreadnought with her weapons sealed, her reactor banked to maintenance idle, and her name still visible on the port bow in white block letters that hadn't been touched in 11 years. Cassell stood on the observation deck of the yard tender and looked at her ship. The tender's captain, a lieutenant commander named Bryce, stood 2 steps behind her. "She's been cold stored since the decommission, Admiral. Reactors at 4%. Weapons are locked out under the non-aggression framework. It would take a CENTCOM override to unseal them." "The override came with my recall order," Cassell said. "CENTCOM sent it embedded in the signal. 3 words on the surface. 47 pages of authorization codes underneath." Bryce stared at her. 47 pages. "They've been planning this recall for a while, Lieutenant Commander. They just needed a reason to pull the trigger." She turned from the viewport. "How fast can you bring her reactor to combat power?" 18 hours minimum. The cold start procedure on an Ashmark-class reactor requires a staged thermal ramp. You push it too fast and the containment seals crack. These ships have been sitting in hard vacuum for 11 years. The seals are. How fast can you actually do it? Bryce hesitated. 14 hours, if I cut corners on the tertiary safety checks. You have 6. Admiral, that's... I know what it is. Who's your best reactor engineer? Bryce didn't hesitate on that one. Chief Engineer Adami. She's been running maintenance cycles on the mothball fleet as a volunteer assignment for the last 8 years. Knows these ships better than the people who built them. Get her aboard Iron Meridian, now. You brought Iron Meridian to combat readiness in 6 hours, Hyun said. It wasn't a question. 6 hours and 11 minutes. Chief Engineer Adami deserves every word of credit for that. She'd been keeping Iron Meridian's reactor pathways clear for 8 years, running unauthorized maintenance cycles during her off-watch hours, replacing corroded seals with spares she fabricated herself from yard stock, keeping the fuel rod alignment within spec when the official maintenance schedule said to let it drift. She told me later she'd been doing it because, and this is a direct quote, someone was going to need this ship again, and when they did, the seals had bet her not be corroded. Adami wasn't part of the original Ashmark crew. No, she transferred in during the mothball period, volunteered for the worst posting in the fleet, babysitting dead ships in a graveyard orbit. She'd read the Pyre Gate after-action report, all of it. The classified annexes, the sensor logs, the Vrannok calving data I'd compiled. She told me she applied for the threshold yards posting the day after she finished reading it. Why? Cassell looked at Hyun with an expression that might have been patience and might have been pity. Because she understood the math, Commander. The Vrannok are a bioorganic collective that has been growing warships for 9,000 years. I destroyed one calving structure. 1. The diplomatic framework CENTCOM signed didn't disarm them, it disarmed us. The only question was when, not whether. Adami knew that. She wanted to be standing next to the reactor when the answer came. The CENTCOM briefing reached Cassell as Iron Meridian's reactor climbed past 60%. She read it in the captain's ready room, a space that still smelled like cold metal and preservation sealant, while the ship shuddered around her as systems that hadn't drawn power in a decade came alive one by one. The overhead lights flickered and held. The ventilation system coughed dust and then settled into its old steady hum. The tactical display on the port wall lit up with a map of the outer Ven that was 11 years out of date. The briefing was 4 pages. It should have been 200. The Vrannok Communion had launched a coordinated calving event across all 67 calving structures simultaneously. In the span of 72 hours, they had produced an estimated 9,000 new biovessels, each one a frigate-class living warship, chitin-armored, self-healing, carrying bioacid projection systems that could eat through Terran hull plating in sustained contact. The swarm had assembled in 3 waves, a vanguard of 2,000 already in motion toward the Pyre Gate corridor, a main body of 5,000 holding in the outer Ven, and a reserve of 2,000 staged at the Communion's core systems. CENTCOM's current deployable fleet strength in the sector was 23 ships. Task Force Ashmark, if Cassell could get it operational, added 14, for a total of 37 against 9,000. Cassell read the numbers twice. Then she pulled up the mothball fleet roster on the ready room terminal. Of the 14 Ashmark-class dreadnoughts in storage at threshold yards, only 7 had intact reactor pathways. The other 7 had been stripped for parts during the first 5 years of mothball, their fuel rods pulled, their containment vessels cracked, their magnetic accelerator coils sold for scrap metal to fund the non-aggression framework's diplomatic mission. She opened a channel to the yard tender. "Bryce, how many of the mothball ships have intact reactor pathways?" "Iron Meridian and 6 others, Admiral. TFS Black Furrow, TFS Ashcroft, TFS Grave Tide, TFS Harkin, TFS Callaway, and TFS Stern Watch. The rest are hulks." "Get me 7 ships, Iron Meridian plus 6. I want them all at combat power by the time the Vanguard reaches Pyre Gate." "Admiral, some of these ships haven't fired their weapons in." "I know exactly how long it's been. Adami's been keeping their reactor pathways clean for 8 years on her own authority, her own time, with replacement seals she fabricated from yard scrap. Get her teams aboard all 7. Combat power in 6 hours. "Admiral, she has a maintenance staff of 14, 7 dreadnoughts. 2 engineers per reactor and a lot of resolve. Make it happen." "The Vanguard is 12 hours from the gate. The deployable force is 16 hours out. If I wait for the deployable force, the Vrannok take the gate and start calving on our side of the corridor. Every hour they hold the gate costs us 6 new warships. That's 72 additional bio-vessels before the deployable force arrives. I am not waiting." "7 ships," O'Darrow said. She'd set her tablet down. "You took 7 mothballed warships, the oldest operational hulls in the Terran fleet, against a vanguard of 2,000 Vrannok bio-vessels. 37 total with CENTCOM's deployable force, but the deployable force was 16 hours out. So yes, for the first engagement it was 7. The after-action report says you didn't wait for the deployable force." "I've explained why." "You've explained the math. I'm asking about the decision." Cassell's jaw tightened by exactly 1 degree. "The decision was the math, Lieutenant Commander. There is no version of this conversation where I separate them. The Vrannok Vanguard was 12 hours from Pyre Gate. CENTCOM's force was 16 hours from Pyre Gate. The gap was 4 hours. In 4 hours, the Vrannok calved 24 new warships at the gate. In 8 hours, 48. The numbers do not stop growing because you want them to. They do not stop because CENTCOM filed a non-aggression framework. They do not stop because you retired the admiral who was trying to tell you." Cassell folded her hands on the table. The light made the scars on her knuckles look like old weld seams. "I took the 7 ships I had, and I went to the gate. Iron Meridian came through the Pyre Gate at 6:19 on the 12th. 11 years and 4 days after Cassell had last transited it in the opposite direction. The gate itself was unchanged, a natural hyperspace bottleneck, a fold in spacetime that compressed a 300 light-year crossing into a 7-minute transit. On the far side, the outer ven opened like a wound. The Vrannok Vanguard was waiting. 2,014 bio-vessels, arranged in the layered spiral formation that Vrannok swarm commanders used for territorial engagements. Each vessel was roughly 300 meters long, a living organism with a chitin hull 7 meters thick, self-healing at a rate of 4 centimeters per hour, carrying ventral bioacid projectors that fired in sustained streams rather than discrete shots. The streams could eat through Terran armor plating in 90 seconds of continuous contact. Against a single target, they were devastating. Against 7 targets spread across a tactical formation, they were merely terrifying. Cassell stood on Iron Meridian's bridge and watched the tactical display populate with contacts. The display had been designed to handle fleet-scale engagements, hundreds of contacts, color-coded by threat level, tracked in 3 dimensions. It was not designed to handle 2,000. The screen turned solid amber. The threat assessment algorithm crashed and rebooted. The reboot produced the same solid amber field. Lieutenant Dryden, the tactical officer, looked at his screen and then at Cassell. He was 26 years old. He had volunteered for the mothball reactivation crew 4 hours ago. Admiral Tactical is showing. I see it. 2,000 contacts. Give or take. I see them, Lieutenant. Ma'am, we have 7 ships. Cassell didn't turn from the display. Weapons. The weapons officer, Lieutenant Commander Vasquez, another volunteer, gray at the temples, steady hands, ran his board. Online, Admiral. All batteries report green. Magnetic accelerators are charged. Missile bays 1 through 16 are loaded. Point defense grid is active. Navigation. Transit complete. Formation is holding. All 7 ships through the gate. Dispersal distance nominal. 7 green dots on a field of 2,000 amber ones. Cassell studied the display for 4 seconds. The Vrannok spiral was tightening. The biovessels drawing inward, preparing to close on the transit point like a fist closing on a throat. She opened a fleet-wide channel. All ships, this is Ashmark Actual. Weapons free. Engagement pattern Meridian 7. Targets of opportunity. Do not stop moving. Do not cluster. If your ship can still fire and still accelerate, you stay in the fight. She closed the channel. The bridge was silent except for the hum of the fusion drives and the soft ticking of the tactical display. The Vrannok Vanguard began to close. Tell us about Meridian 7, Hyan said. It's a dispersal pattern I developed during the original Ashmark deployment. Standard fleet doctrine says you concentrate firepower, mass your ships, overlap your fields of fire, create kill zones. That works against conventional opponents. It does not work against the Vrannok. Why not? Because the Vrannok bioacid projectors are contact weapons. They fire in streams, not bolts. If you mass your ships, you give the streams overlapping target areas. The acid hits one hull and the splash damages the next. Meridian 7 does the opposite. You spread your ships to maximum tactical separation, far enough apart that no bioacid stream can reach 2 targets simultaneously. Each ship operates independently, at maximum speed, cutting through the swarm on staggered vectors. The Vrannok can't concentrate their streams, because you're never in one place long enough. And the cost? The cost is that each ship is alone, no mutual support, no overlapping fire. If one ship takes a critical hit, the others can't cover it. You trade safety for speed, and you bet everything on the assumption that your ships are faster and tougher than anything in the swarm. Cassell paused. The pause was the first crack in the flat surface of her voice, and it lasted exactly 1 second. Iron Meridian and her sisters were built 38 years ago. They were the heaviest warships in the Terran fleet at the time of their construction. 11 years in mothball hadn't changed what they were. They were 1,340 meters of triple-layered composite armor, magnetic accelerator batteries on every arc, and fusion drive engines that could push them to 0.37 C in sustained combat maneuver. The Vrannok biovessels were 300 meters of chitin. Fast, numerous, self-healing. But they were not dreadnoughts. The first pass through the Vrannok Vanguard lasted 19 minutes. Iron Meridian's magnetic accelerators fired 1,247 rounds in that window, dense metal penetrators traveling at 12% of light speed, each one punching through chitin hull plating like a needle through wet paper. The biovessels did not explode. They did not shatter. They died the way living things die. Systems failing, fluids venting, internal organs rupturing under kinetic shock. The chitin cracked in long fissures and the organisms inside went dark, one by one, drifting into the void as cooling corpses. Cassell watched the amber contacts wink out on the tactical display. 17 in the first minute, 41 by the third, 109 by the seventh. The pattern was not elegant. It was industrial. Iron Meridian carved a lane through the swarm the way a plow carves a furrow, and behind her, the 6 other dreadnoughts carved their own lanes on staggered vectors, and the Vrannok vanguard found itself being cut apart from 7 directions simultaneously. The bioacid streams found their marks, too. Iron Meridian took 11 direct contacts in the first pass, sustained streams of corrosive biological fluid that clung to the hull and ate into the outer armor layer with a sound the crew described as rain on a tin roof, if the rain were dissolving the tin. The first layer of composite held. The second layer held. The acid burned through to the third layer on 2 of the contact points before the ship's velocity carried it out of stream range. Hull integrity? Cassell asked. 91%, Admiral. 2 breaches on the port ventral, sealed and holding. Acid residue is still active on the outer hull, eating at the composite at 3 centimeters per minute. Damage control has it contained. 3 centimeters per minute, Cassell repeated. And the composite is how thick? 11 centimeters at the breach points, Admiral. Then we have approximately 3 minutes before we need to worry about those spots. Come about. Second pass. Vasquez looked at his weapons board. Admiral, Accelerator Battery 3 is reporting thermal warnings. The coils haven't been fired at sustained combat rate in 11 years. The heat sink system is barely keeping up. Is it firing? Yes, Admiral. Then it's functional enough. Continue firing until it stops. Battery 3 did not stop. Adami, somewhere 3 decks below the bridge, was running coolant through the heat sinks by hand, physically redirecting flow from a junction box that had corroded shut during mothball by using a length of emergency pipe she'd welded into place during the 6-hour sprint to the gate. She would tell Cassell about it later, in the same flat tone she used for everything. At the time, all Cassell knew was that the battery kept firing, and the thermal warnings kept flashing, and the warnings didn't matter because the biovessels were still closing, and the accelerators were the only language the Vrannok understood. The second pass was harder. The Vrannok swarm had adapted, not through tactical intelligence, but through the organic pattern recognition that 9,000 years of biological evolution had encoded into their collective nervous system. The biovessels shifted their spiral, creating denser clusters at the predicted intercept vectors. Instead of a uniform field of amber, the tactical display now showed knots and channels, the knots thick with biovessels, the channels empty. Cassell saw it immediately. They're hurting us. Vasquez nodded. They're creating kill corridors. If we take the channels, we fly straight into massed acid streams from both sides. Then we don't take the channels. Navigation, plot a vector through the nearest knot. Straight through the center. Lieutenant Dryden looked up from his console. Through it, Admiral. Through it. The knots are dense, but density means their biovessels can't maneuver. They're packed too tight to dodge. We go through at full acceleration, fire everything we have into the mass, and we're out the other side before the acid streams can converge. Dryden plotted the vector. Iron Meridian's drive surged. The 1,340-meter dreadnought accelerated into the densest concentration of Vrannok biovessels like a fist punching through a wall of wet clay. The magnetic accelerators fired on continuous cycle, 847 rounds in 11 minutes, each round tearing through multiple biovessels in sequence as the penetrators passed through one hull and into the next. The tactical display flickered as the threat assessment system struggled to keep up with the rate of kills. The acid streams hit Iron Meridian from every direction at once. The hull rang. The outer composite layer softened and slewed away in sheets. The second layer cracked under thermal stress. Adami's voice came through the intercom from the engineering deck, flat and precise, and carrying the same tone as Cassell's. Outer hull is gone on sectors 12 through 19. Second layer is holding at 60%. We're venting atmosphere on deck 7. I've sealed it. If you're planning a third pass, I need 90 seconds to reinforce the port ventral seams. You have 60. Then I need faster welders. I need you to not die, Chief. 60 seconds. You made 4 passes through the Vanguard, Odaro said. 4 passes, 73 minutes total engagement time. We destroyed 1,614 of the 2,014 biovessels. The remaining 400 broke formation and scattered into the outer Ven. Losses. 1 ship, TFS Black Furrow. She took concentrated acid streams from 40-plus biovessels simultaneously during the third pass. The swarm learned that if they couldn't chase us, they could wait at the predicted intercept points and mask their fire. Black Furrow's hull gave way amidships. The acid ate through all 3 composite layers in under 40 seconds. She broke apart along the structural spine. Crew of 340. Cassell stopped. The flat surface of her voice held, but the pause was longer this time. No survivors. The silence in the debrief chamber had a different quality now. Hyun stopped turning his stylus entirely. Odaro set her tablet face down on the table. You continued after losing Black Furrow. I continued. Cassell's voice didn't change, but her hands pressed harder against the table and the scars on her knuckles went white for 2 seconds before she eased the pressure back. Black Furrow's captain was Commander Daria Osman. She had been in Mothball Command for 6 years. She volunteered for reactivation before I finished asking. She knew the odds. She knew the ship. She knew what the acid could do. And you sent her in anyway. I sent all of us in, myself included. The difference is that Iron Meridian's composite held and Black Furrow's didn't. Black Furrow was the oldest hull in the group, 41 years in service before Mothball. Her composite had microfractures in the amidships section that were within acceptable tolerances on paper. They were not within acceptable tolerances when 40 bioacid streams hit the same spot simultaneously. The math doesn't stop because people die, Commander. 6 ships against 400 scattered biovessels. We hunted them for 11 hours. The scattered biovessels tried to regroup 3 times. The collective nervous system was still functional enough for basic swarm coordination. Each time they regrouped, we hit the cluster before it could consolidate. By the time CENTCOM's deployable force arrived, there were 19 biovessels left, and they were running. But the Vanguard was only the first wave. Cassell knew this. She had known it from the moment she read the CENTCOM briefing in Iron Meridian's ready room. 2,000 was the Vanguard. The main body, 5,000 biovessels, was still assembling in the outer Ven. And the Vrannok calving structures were still alive, still producing, still adding to the count every single hour. The deployable force arrived at Pyre Gate 16 hours after the Vanguard engagement. 23 modern warships, fast, well-armed, but smaller than the Ashmark dreadnoughts and untested against Vrannok bioacid weapons. Their commanding officer, Commodore Elias Rand, came aboard Iron Meridian for a face-to-face briefing. He was 38 years old. He had never fought a Vrannok engagement. He had never seen a bioacid stream eat through hull plating. He had never watched a ship the size of Black Furrow break apart along its spine while 340 people died inside. Cassell showed him the calving frequency data she'd been collecting for 11 years. The charts covered the ready room wall, pinned to the bulkhead with magnetic clips, hand-annotated in Cassell's precise block print. Red pencil marks showed the calving peaks. Blue marks showed the estimated cumulative output. The blue line climbed in a curve that looked organic because it was. 67 calving structures, Cassell said. 66 still active. Current combined output, approximately 12 new biovessels per hour. The main body is 5,000. In 30 days at current calving rates, it will be 13,000. In 60 days, 21,000. In 6 months, the number exceeds what our entire fleet can engage. Rand stared at the charts. His jaw was set. He was a good officer, the kind who studied the data before he spoke. He studied it for 60 seconds. CENTCOM's projection said the main body wouldn't move for weeks. CENTCOM's projection is based on the assumption that the Vrannok follow predictable strategic timelines. They don't. The Vrannok are an organism, Commodore. They don't plan campaigns. They grow toward food sources. We are the food source. The main body will move when the organism decides it's ready, and the organism won't tell us when that is. What do you recommend? Cassell turned from the charts. Her face in the ready room light looked exactly the way it looked in the debrief chamber, composed, certain, and carrying something behind the eyes that was older than patience. We don't wait for the main body. We go to the calving structures and we kill them, all 66. Rand looked at the charts again, at the blue line climbing, at the red peaks, each one a calving event, each one adding hundreds of biovessels to the count, at the 11 years of data that one retired admiral had collected from a cabin in the Barrens with nothing but a shortwave receiver and a wall chart. How long, he asked. If we split into 6 strike groups, 1 dreadnought per group, with your modern ships providing speed and screening, 11 days, maybe 12. We hit the calving structures in their own space, one by one, before the main body can respond. That's deep inside the communion. Yes. We'll be outnumbered at every target. Yes. And if the main body moves while we're spread across 300 systems, then we race it to the gate and fight whatever reaches us, but we will have killed the structures first. Even if the main body takes the gate, even if they push through to our side of the corridor without calving structures, they cannot replenish. The 9,000 they have now is all they will ever have. The math changes in our favor for the first time in 9,000 years. Rand was quiet for 10 seconds. He looked at the charts one more time, at the 11 years of data, at the pencil marks, at the blue curve climbing. He looked at the star chart underneath, the one Cassell had pinned to the wall of her cabin in the Barrens and brought with her to Iron Meridian like a soldier bringing a battle flag. My ships aren't built for bioacid combat, he said. They're faster than yours, but they don't have triple-layer composite armor. One sustained acid stream and my hulls breach. Which is why your ships screen while my dreadnoughts kill the structures. Your speed keeps you ahead of the streams. My armor keeps me in range. It's the same partnership that worked at the gate, scaled up. At the gate, you lost Black Furrow. At the gate, the swarm was 2,000 strong and coordinated. The defensive swarms at individual calving structures are 300 to 500, and they don't communicate between systems fast enough to warn each other. We hit them one at a time, move fast, and we're gone before the next structure knows we're coming. Rand looked at her. He was a good officer, thorough, disciplined, accustomed to operating within the boundaries of CENTCOM doctrine. What Cassell was proposing was so far outside those boundaries that it existed in a different vocabulary entirely. I'm in, he said. The calving campaign, Hyan said. He said it the way historians say it, with the capital letters audible. 11 days, 30 ships, 66 targets spread across 300 systems. 30 ships, 6 of them 38-year-old dreadnoughts held together with a Damies maintenance and sheer stubbornness. The modern ships were faster. The old ships were tougher. I split the force into 6 strike groups, each one built around a dreadnought, each one assigned a sector of the Communion's calving infrastructure. And you led Strike Group 1. I led Strike Group 1, Iron Meridian plus 4 modern destroyers. Our sector was the spine, the densest cluster of calving structures, 14 targets in 9 systems. 14. The other 5 groups had approximately 10 targets each. I took the hardest sector because I had the toughest ship. Iron Meridian was built for this. Adami had kept her that way. The spine was the heart of the Vrannok communion's reproductive capacity. 14 calving structures, each one a moon-sized biological organism tethered to an asteroid or a planetoid, each one surrounded by a defensive swarm of 300 to 500 biovessels. The structures themselves were ancient. The oldest had been producing biovessels for 7,000 years, layering generation upon generation of chitin and neural tissue onto a living core that pulsed with the slow rhythm of a heartbeat measured in minutes rather than seconds. They were the cathedrals of the Vrannok species. They were the factories. They were, in a real and biological sense, the mothers. Cassell's strike group hit them in sequence, 1 or 2 per day, moving through the spine at a pace that never let the swarm commanders communicate fast enough to coordinate a defense. The Vrannok collective intelligence relied on chemical signaling between biovessels, fast enough for coordinated swarm tactics within a system, far too slow to organize a multi-system response in under 72 hours. Cassell gave them 12. The tactic was the same at every structure. The 4 modern destroyers would engage the defensive swarm at long range, drawing the biovessels away from the calving structure in a dispersed skirmish that used the modern ship's speed advantage to stay ahead of the acid streams. While the swarm chased the destroyers, Iron Meridian punched through the gap at full combat acceleration and hit the structure with everything she had. Calving structures were not warships. They were not armored in the combat sense. Their chitin was thick but metabolic, optimized for growth rather than defense. They were not fast. They were alive and they were enormous, and they died hard, but they died. Iron Meridian's magnetic accelerators tore into the biological mass at ranges so close that the crew could see the individual chitin plates cracking through the forward viewports. The structures bled, not metaphorically. They bled a pale, luminescent fluid that drifted in clouds around the dying organism, catching the light of distant stars, and the fluid froze into crystalline sheets that Iron Meridian's hull plowed through in showers of ice and light. At the 3rd structure, the largest in the spine, tethered to a planetoid in the Vrannok system of Cassell, the defensive swarm refused to be drawn away. 411 biovessels held formation around the structure and waited. The destroyers couldn't break them loose. Cassell brought Iron Meridian in anyway. The dreadnought tore through the defensive formation at 0.28C, firing on continuous cycle, taking bioacid streams from every angle. The hull screamed. Adami screamed back at it, her voice on the intercom calling out damage reports in the same flat tone, sector by sector, breach by breach. The outer composite was gone on 30% of the hull by the time Iron Meridian reached the calving structure. The second layer was failing on 12 sectors. 3 compartments were open to vacuum. Cassell didn't slow down. Iron Meridian's accelerators fired into the calving structure at point-blank range, 200 meters, close enough that the muzzle flash lit the structure's chitin from the inside. The structure cracked open like an egg. Luminescent fluid erupted in a geyser that caught the planetoid's dim light and turned the space around them into a cathedral of frozen blue-white crystal. Target destroyed, Vasquez reported. Come about. Next target. Cassell watched every one of them die. 14 structures in her sector. 14 organisms that had been growing warships for millennia, killed in 11 days by a 60-year-old woman in a 38-year-old ship that was losing hull integrity with every engagement. She did not enjoy it. She did not regret it. She had warned them. She had warned everyone. On day 9, the destroyer TFS Ridgeline was lost. A Vrannok defensive swarm, larger than intelligence had estimated, over 700 biovessels, caught Ridgeline between the 11th and 12th calving structures. The acid streams converged before Ridgeline could reach open space. Crew of 190. 18 survived in escape pods that Iron Meridian recovered 6 hours later. The senior survivor was Ensign Torvath, 23 years old, with acid burns on both hands from where she'd gripped the pod's manual release lever after the hydraulics failed. Cassell met her in Iron Meridian's medical bay. Torvath tried to salute. Cassell told her to stop. "What happened?" Cassell asked. Torvath's voice was steady despite the medication. "The swarm was thicker than projected. We drew them away from the structure as planned, but they didn't follow us far enough. When we turned to make the second pass, they were already between us and the open. Commander Marsh tried to punch through. The acid hit the drives first." "Commander Marsh?" "Dead, Admiral. He stayed on the bridge." Cassell looked at the young woman's bandaged hands. She thought about Commander Osman on Black Furrow. She thought about the 340 crew who died in 73 minutes at Pyre Gate, and the 190 on Ridgeline, and the 18 who survived because an ensign with acid on her hands pulled a manual lever that the hydraulics couldn't. "Ensign, when you're cleared by medical, report to Iron Meridian's bridge. I need a junior tactical officer." Torvath stared at her. "Admiral, I was a navigation ensign on a destroyer. And now you're a junior tactical officer on a dreadnought. We're short-staffed. The shoal is 4 days out. I need everyone who can stand and think at the same time." 62 of 66 calving structures destroyed, Cassell said in the debrief chamber. 4 were too heavily defended for strike groups 4 and 5 to reach. The Vrannok had concentrated their reserve swarms around the core system structures. Those groups pulled back and marked the coordinates for follow-up strikes. And the main body? The main body moved on day 7 of the campaign. 5,300 biovessels, transiting toward the Pyre Gate corridor in a single mass formation. They were 4 days from the gate when the calving campaign ended. "What did you do?" Cassell's hands were still flat on the table. They had not moved once during the entire debrief. "I reassembled all 6 strike groups at a rally point in the outer Ven. I sent a status report to CENTCOM informing them that 62 calving structures were destroyed and the main body was inbound. I asked for reinforcements. CENTCOM replied that no additional forces were available." She looked at Hyun. "Then I took everything we had, all 30 ships, 6 dreadnoughts and 24 modern warships, some of them carrying hull damage from the calving campaign that hadn't been repaired, and I went to meet them. The Battle of the Vrannok Shoal, that was the name the historians would give it later, after the reports were declassified and the footage was released, and the scale of it became something that people could process from the safety of retrospect. At the time, it had no name. It was just the next thing that had to be done. 30 Terran warships against 5,300 Vrannok biovessels. The ratio was 177 to 1. The Vrannok main body filled the tactical display from edge to edge, not solid amber this time, but a slow-moving wall of contacts that stretched across 9 million cubic kilometers of space and pulsed with the organic rhythm of a single distributed organism. Cassell stood on Iron Meridian's bridge. The old dreadnought's hull was scarred from the calving campaign, acid burns on 40% of the surface, outer composite layer missing on a third of the hull, the port magnetic accelerator battery running at 60% capacity after a structural crack in the mounting. Adami had reinforced the crack with emergency bracing and filed a damage report that ended with the words, "We'll hold until it doesn't." Cassell didn't bother with speeches. She opened a fleet-wide channel and said 6 words. "Meridian 7, all ships, weapons free." The 30 ships dispersed into the swarm like shrapnel into a body. The first hour was the worst. Iron Meridian's accelerators fired on continuous cycle, but the biospecimen density was so thick that the ship's forward sensors couldn't track individual targets, only masses. Cassell watched the tactical display turn from a field of individual amber contacts into an undifferentiated amber wall. The ship was flying through biological material, not around it, through it. The magnetic accelerators punched lanes through the mass, and the ship followed the lanes, and the lanes closed behind her as more bio-vessels filled the gaps. Hull integrity 79%, Adami reported from engineering. Her voice was the same flat tone as always. Acid contact on 42 sectors. Outer composite is gone on sectors 1 through 11, port side. I'm venting coolant to neutralize the acid residue on the forward hull. It's buying us minutes. How many minutes? 4, maybe 5. After that, the second layer starts to go. The TFS Ashcroft died in the second hour. She'd been running a staggered vector on Iron Meridian's starboard quarter when a dense knot of bio-vessels, over 200 concentrated in a sphere less than a kilometer across, collapsed on her from 3 directions. The bioacid streams converged on the same hull section. The composite buckled. The structural spine fractured. Ashcroft broke in two, her forward section tumbling into the swarm, her aft section continuing under momentum with her engines still firing into nothing. Her crew of 380 died in the time it took the acid to reach the inner compartments. Cassell heard the death of Ashcroft the way admirals hear the death of ships, as a green dot disappearing from the tactical display, followed by Lieutenant Dryden's voice saying, "Ashcroft is gone," in a tone that was too young for what it was carrying. "Noted," Cassell said. "Continue engagement." 4 more ships died in the hours that followed. TFS Harkin took a concentrated acid barrage that ate through her reactor shielding and triggered a containment breach she detonated, and the explosion killed 11 bio-vessels that were clinging to her hull. 2 of Rand's modern destroyers, Kestrel and Anthem, were swarmed and dissolved. A third, Talon, lost her drives to acid damage and drifted, firing her weapons until the bio-vessels enveloped her completely. Rand himself survived. His flagship, the modern cruiser TFS Daybreak, took heavy damage but held together through the full 9 hours. He would tell Cassell later, in the wardroom of Iron Meridian after the engagement, that the moment he understood the battle was winnable was in the 5th hour, when the Vrannok swarm's coordination began to degrade. "They got slower," he said. "The responses got looser. The acid stream started missing. The formation, if you could call it a formation, started pulling apart at the edges." "Neural degradation," Cassell replied. "Every biospecimen we killed was a node in the collective nervous system. By the 5th hour, we'd killed enough nodes that the network couldn't process tactical data at combat speed anymore. The organism was thinking slower than we were moving. You knew that would happen." "I hoped it would happen. The math suggested it. The calving frequency data I'd collected over 11 years showed that the Vrannok collective intelligence scales linearly with node count. Reduce the node count by 40% and the network's processing speed drops by the same amount. By the 5th hour, we'd killed roughly 2,000 bio-vessels. That's a 38% reduction. The math held." "The math held," Rand repeated. He was staring at the table in the wardroom. His hands were shaking. It was the first time he'd been still long enough for the adrenaline to wear off. 2,000 kills in 5 hours. With 22 ships. We started with 30. We ended with 22. 22 was enough. The final 4 hours of the shoal engagement were different. The Vrannok neural network had degraded past the threshold for coordinated swarm tactics, and the remaining bio-vessels began operating on individual biological instinct, simpler, less coordinated, but in some ways more dangerous because their movements became unpredictable. A biospecimen operating on instinct didn't follow formation patterns. It lunged. It fled. It circled back and rammed. Iron Meridian took a direct ram from a 300-meter biospecimen in the 7th hour. The organism struck the dreadnought's forward bow at a closing velocity that the sensor logs later calculated at 0.19 c. The impact killed 73 crew in the forward compartments. The bow crumpled inward by 9 meters. The forward magnetic accelerator battery was destroyed, the coils shattered, the mounting twisted, the ammunition feed sheared away. Adami reported the damage in the same flat voice she'd used for every report since the battle began, and at the end of the report she added, "Forward battery is gone. We have ventral, dorsal, and stern. Recommend we turn around and fight backwards." Cassell turned around and fought backwards. Iron Meridian spent the last 2 hours of the shoal engagement flying stern first into the disintegrating swarm, her remaining accelerators firing into a diminishing cloud of biological debris and dying organisms. By the 9th hour, the tactical display showed 681 amber contacts scattered across a volume of space so large that individual pursuit was impractical. Cassell called halt. The 22 surviving ships reformed at the rally point. 7 of them were venting atmosphere from unrepaired hull breaches. 4 had lost main weapon systems. Iron Meridian was missing her bow, her forward battery, and 12% of her crew. She was still combat capable. She would always be combat capable, as long as Adami was aboard and at least one accelerator battery still functioned. Ensign Torvath, standing at the junior tactical station where Cassell had placed her 4 days earlier, had spent the entire 9-hour engagement tracking biospecimen movements and calling out intercept vectors in a voice that never cracked. Her bandaged hands had bled through the dressings. She hadn't mentioned it. Cassell hadn't asked. The engagement lasted 9 hours, Hyan said. He was reading from the after-action report now, his voice carrying the slight tremor of a man encountering numbers that don't feel real. "You lost 8 ships. Crew casualties, 2,740 dead. Vrannok losses, 4,619 biovessels destroyed. 4,619 confirmed kills. The remaining 681 scattered. Most of them were damaged, chitin breached, internal systems failing. The Vrannok organism doesn't recover from that kind of distributed trauma quickly. Each dead biospecimen is a severed node in the collective nervous system. Enough dead nodes and the whole network degrades, slower responses, weaker coordination, reduced calving stimulus to the surviving structures. At 4,619 kills, the communion's neural network lost approximately 80% of its outer Venn processing capacity. It takes years, decades, for the collective intelligence to reconstitute after that kind of loss. You crippled them. I crippled their capacity to project force through the Pyre Gate corridor for the next 15 to 20 years. Their calving infrastructure is destroyed. 62 of 67 structures gone. Their main body is shattered. Their reserve force of 2,000 is intact, but without calving structures to replenish losses, those 2,000 are all they will ever have until the 4 surviving structures can rebuild the network. And those 4 structures, at their maximum combined output, produce 1 biospecimen every 3 hours. Cassell leaned back in her chair for the first time. The motion was small, 2 inches, maybe 3, but it was the first time she had moved anything other than her mouth since the debrief began. "Commander Hyan, Lieutenant Commander O'Darrow, I know why I'm in this room. CENTCOM needs to decide whether what I did was authorized or whether I exceeded my recall mandate. The recall order said Pyre Gate recalled. It did not say destroy every calving structure in the Vrannok communion. It did not say engage the main body, with 30 ships against 5,000. She looked at them both. The scars on her knuckles caught the light. 11 years ago, I destroyed 1 calving structure without authorization, and you took my command. You took my ships. You put Iron Meridian in a graveyard, and you signed a piece of paper that said the Vrannok were our partners. I spent 11 years listening to the calving frequencies get louder while CENTCOM pretended the math had changed. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. The math never changes. The Vrannok are an organism. They grow toward food. They do not negotiate in good faith because negotiation is not a concept their biology supports. They mimic it the way a deep-sea organism mimics light to draw prey closer. Every year CENTCOM spent pretending otherwise was a year the Vrannok spent growing. I told you this 11 years ago. I told you in 219 intelligence reports. You filed them and you retired me. She put her hands back on the table. So yes, I exceeded my recall mandate. I took 7 mothballed dreadnoughts and 600 personnel who volunteered knowing the ships were old and the odds were insane, and I broke the Vrannok vanguard at the gate. Then I took 30 ships and I killed 62 calving structures in 11 days. Then I took those same 30 ships, some of them held together with emergency patches and Adami's prayers and structural bracing, that was filed as "will hold until it doesn't." And I met the main body at the shoal and I broke it. 8 ships lost, 2,700 dead. 8 ships lost, 2,700 dead, and the Pyre Gate corridor is secure for the first time in 9,000 years. Debrief ended at 1847. Hyan and Odaro collected their recorders and left without comment. Cassell sat in the empty room for 7 minutes, her hands still flat on the steel table, the surgical light still leaving no shadows. Then she stood, straightened the collar of the duty uniform she'd been given when she arrived. It still had the Ashmark Task Force patch on the shoulder, the one she'd torn off 11 years ago and someone had stitched back on, and walked to the observation gallery. Iron Meridian was visible through the gallery viewport. The old dreadnought was in dry dock now, her hull scarred with acid burns that ran in long streaks from bow to stern, her port ventral plating cracked and patched and cracked again, her starboard magnetic accelerator battery dark, where a bioacid stream had eaten through the housing during the 9th hour of the shoal engagement. She looked like what she was, a 38-year-old warship that had been mothballed for a decade, dragged out of storage by a retired admiral with a grudge and a shortwave radio, and driven through 3 engagements that should have killed her. She was still alive. Chief Engineer Adami was standing at the far end of the gallery, looking at the same ship. She was a small woman, dark-skinned, with hands that were permanently stained with reactor coolant, and a face that carried no particular expression except competence. She'd been the one who brought Iron Meridian's reactor from 4% to combat power in 6 hours. She'd been the one who kept the old dreadnought systems running through 73 minutes of close-range combat at Pyre Gate, 11 days of the calving campaign, and 9 hours of hell at the shoal. She'd been the one who, when the port ventral hull breached during the shoal engagement, had personally welded the emergency seal while bioacid ate through the outer plating 3 meters above her head. She'd filed the damage report that ended with "will hold until it doesn't." It had held. Cassell walked to her. They stood side by side, looking at the ship. "Adami, Admiral, they're going to take her away from me again." Adami looked at Iron Meridian, at the acid burns and the patched plating and the dark accelerator housing, at the name on the bow, still readable through the damage. "Maybe," she said, "but they can't unkill 62 calving structures." Cassell almost smiled. It was the closest she'd come in 11 years. "No, they can't." They stood there in silence, 2 women who had been waiting for the same war, one from a cabin in the Barrens, one from a graveyard orbit, and who had fought it together with a ship that was older than both of them and tougher than either of them would ever admit to being. The dry dock lights washed over Iron Meridian's battered hull, and the ship sat in the light the way old warships sit, heavy, scarred, patient, and carrying inside her the memory of every round she'd fired, and every crew member she'd lost, and every bioacid stream that had tried to eat her alive and failed. 3 weeks later, CENTCOM issued its ruling. The review division found that Cassell had exceeded her recall mandate in prosecuting the calving campaign and the shoal engagement. It recommended a formal reprimand and a return to retired status. The ruling was overturned by the fleet admiral within the hour. The override memorandum was 4 sentences long. Rear Admiral Cassell's actions at Pyre Gate, the calving campaign, and the Vrannok Shoal constitute the single most consequential defensive operation in Terran fleet history. The destruction of 62 of 67 Vrannok calving structures has eliminated the Communion's capacity to project biovessel force against the Terran frontier for an estimated minimum of 40 years. Task Force Ashmark is hereby reactivated with Admiral Cassell in permanent command. Iron Meridian is to be refitted, not retired. Cassell read the memorandum in her quarters aboard Iron Meridian. The quarters were smaller than she remembered, or maybe she was just older, and the spaces that had once felt like home now felt like what they were, a steel box inside a warship. The bunk was narrow. The desk was bolted to the deck. The viewport showed the dry dock lights and the work crews moving across Iron Meridian's scarred hull in pressure suits, cutting away the acid-scarred plating, welding new composite panels into place, rebuilding the starboard accelerator housing. The work would take months. The damage assessment listed 847 individual repair items: hull breaches, structural fractures, compromised compartments, corroded conduit runs, disabled weapon systems, failed sensor arrays. Adami had organized the list by priority: critical systems first, cosmetic last. The cosmetic list was 3 pages long, and Adami had written optional across the top in red marker. Cassell had months. She had waited 11 years. She could wait a few more. She set the memorandum down and walked to the viewport. The dry dock lights were on. Iron Meridian's hull gleamed under the work lamps where the new plating met the old, bright composite next to weathered steel, clean lines next to acid scars, the fresh and the ancient side by side. Outside the viewport, beyond the dry dock, beyond the orbital facility, beyond the thin blue line of the planet's atmosphere, the stars of the outer Ven were visible. Somewhere out there, the 4 surviving calving structures were still alive. The reserve force of 2,000 biovessels was still intact. The Vrannok organism was wounded, not dead. Cassell looked at the stars the way a hunter looks at tracks. The math had not changed. She would be ready. On Vrannok Prime, deep in the Communion's core systems, beneath a sky that pulsed with the bioluminescence of a living atmosphere, the organism that served as the Communion's collective intelligence processed the data from the Pyre Gate corridor. It had taken 3 weeks for the full scope of the damage to propagate through the collective's distributed consciousness. The organism did not experience shock. It did not experience grief. It experienced something closer to a taxonomic failure, a category in its vast biological archive that could not accommodate what had happened. 9,000 years of calving records, 9,000 years of territorial growth, 9,000 years of classifying every species it encountered, every rival, every prey, every entity that wandered into the outer Ven and was absorbed or cataloged or ignored. The archive was vast. It was thorough. It had never once been wrong. 62 calving structures, the oldest of which had been producing biovessel since before the species that destroyed them had discovered fire. Gone in 11 days. The organism searched its archive for the classification of the entity that had done this. It found the entry: Terran Frontier, Diplomatic Partner, Category 3 Minor Spacefaring Civilization, Limited Fleet Capacity, Non-Expansionist, Calving Potential, 0. The entry was 11 years old. It had not been updated since the first Pyre Gate incident, when a single Terran task force had destroyed one calving structure and then been withdrawn by its own command hierarchy. The organism had classified that event as an anomaly, a brief spasm of aggression from a species that lacked the biological infrastructure to sustain military operations at scale. The classification had seemed correct. The Terran command hierarchy had punished its own commander, dismantled its own task force, and signed a framework that prevented the reactivation of its own warships. What organism punishes its own predatory instincts? The classification of non-threat had been, by every biological metric, accurate. It had been wrong. The organism began to update the entry. It erased diplomatic partner. It erased Category 3 minor spacefaring civilization. It erased limited fleet capacity. It erased non-expansionist. It erased calving potential, 0. It wrote in the chemical language of its species, a language that encoded meaning in molecular structure rather than sound, that carried nuance in the angle of a chemical bond and emphasis in the concentration of a pheromonal chain, a new classification. The classification had no direct translation into any spoken language, but the closest human approximation was this: category error, reclassify, do not engage. The organism stared at the new entry with the distributed awareness of its surviving neural network. It was the first time in 9,000 years it had written those words about anything. 9,000 years of cataloging species, 9,000 years of classifying threats, and the species that had broken its archive was one it had dismissed as a minor civilization with limited fleet capacity and 0 calving potential. The species that calved nothing had killed the calving structures themselves. The organism could not process that. It would try for years. It would never quite succeed. In the dry dock, 1,100 light-years away, Iron Meridian's hull rang with the sound of welders. Admiral Cassell stood at the viewport and waited. She was good at waiting. She had been good at it for 11 years. She would be good at it for as many more as the math required. The math, after all, never changed. And neither did she.